Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Trust you enjoyed your afternoon tea. Saw a couple of people wandering in with the schooners out of the combi keg situation we've got set up for you there, so we're enjoying afternoon tea. Hope you really enjoyed the parallel streams as well. Don't forget, if you missed something during the course of the day, or if there's two things you would rather go to at the same time, obviously you can't, etc., all of the content generated in the conference exists on the on-air platform for I think it's 3 months after the conference, then goes to YouTube as well. So if you miss something or want to take in it again, make sure you do use that facility. We've got 3 short, sharp keynotes for you this afternoon before we wrap up and start to prepare for our gala dinner. We're about to hear from the Director of Information Security Program at ANU with over 15 years' experience in program management, public sector governance and senior leadership roles. Her previous roles include the Cyber Engagement Manager at the ANU National Security College, Program Manager at the Cyber Institute and Executive Director of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia. Suffice to say, when I clicked on her page at the ANU staff website, this is what I got. Alleged phone number, alleged email, and that profile, and that's all. So to put a face to the silhouette, to talk to us on the topic of Beyond the Breach, From Legacy to Zero Trust, a woman of mystery, please welcome Liz West.
Good afternoon. That is me. It's a lovely photo of me. It's taken a little while ago. It's fine. So firstly, thank you to AusCERT and the conference partners for welcoming me to speak to you today. My name is Liz West, and I'm the Director of Information Security Program at the Australian National University. Sithagra Sivaratnam, ANU's CISO, was scheduled to attend, but was unfortunately unable to make it, and he sends his apologies. Like it says on the tin, I am here to talk about the ANU data breach, specifically what came next, and the generational shift on our horizon. The ANU was established in 1946. We're ranked 20th in size for Australian universities, but #1 in the World University Rankings. A major focus of our mission as a university is to conduct research which transforms society and creates national capability. We're also a Commonwealth government authority. We seek to be that bridge between research, academia, governance, and policy. This designation also means that we are subject to additional scrutiny and regulation. And the entire higher education sector has just been made critical infrastructure, which is fun. The ANU has an annual turnover of $1.3 billion, 4,500 staff, and roughly 20,000 students. And we are a target every day, every second, every click, just like many of you. In November 2018, a spear phishing email kicked off a campaign that would lead to a breach of the ANU's administrative systems. As our Vice Chancellor put it, this wasn't a smash and grab. It was a diamond heist. It's likely they spent months gathering intel on ANU and planning the attack. They used custom-built malware and zero-day hacks to exploit unknown vulnerabilities in our systems. And they dismantled their operations as they went to cover their tracks. The breach comprised of 3 main elements. The attackers used multiple spear phishing campaigns to try and gain credentials, targeting elevated privileges in particular. Once they got on the network, they started sniffing for more. The attackers built a shadow ecosystem of compromised ANU machines, tools, and network connections, and from this they built their mapping and attack stations. And finally, the attackers used a variety of methods to extract stolen data and credentials via email and other compromised ANU systems. If you want to know more about the how of the data breach, you can find it in the public report that ANU published. The report is the culmination of months of investigation into the hack. It outlines the incredible level of sophistication behind it, as well as a detailed timeline of what happened and when. In fact, it was during this investigation that we found a second attack and disrupted it. The report was made public for a number of important reasons: to offer transparency to our community, to take ownership of our weaknesses, and to make a public promise to do better, to not let this happen again, and importantly, to encourage disclosure of these types of attacks more broadly. As our VC put it, I want my pain to be your gain so that we know what we are up against. We wanted to encourage the practice of an early warning system. We've carried this theme into the selection criteria of the tools that we implement. Tools that feed threat intelligence detected in one environment back into the machine learning to protect the rest of the environment are going to have a greater protection long term. As an aside, the breach report has been translated into 4 languages, including Russian and Mandarin, and is on the dark web as a training tool. It is important to note, because I have been asked before, this wasn't done by us. The two attacks were an act of organizational trauma, a violation that robbed us of the trust that we had in our systems, in our processes, and in our people. But it was also a singular point of clarity. The university had to take a sharp right turn overnight into a new security posture and start the rapid uphill climb to get ANU secure. This was the new normal. The focus and the risk of the breaches also gave us an opportunity to surge resources to gain control and had decision makers listening when we called for change. After the first breach, a CISO was appointed who reports directly to the Vice Chancellor. Once he was installed, he started gathering anyone at the ANU who knew the systems and how to protect them into a task force. Where we had gaps, and we had many, we found industry partners to assist. From that, the Information Security Office was born. As an entity, we have one goal: to keep ANU safe and credible. The focus of our efforts is entirely on the ANU community. We don't have all the answers. We haven't even finished asking ourselves all of the questions. But we've learned a few things that might be of interest to you today. A couple of slides back, I mentioned the attackers leveraged unknown vulnerabilities in our systems. The vulnerabilities were unknown because our systems weren't well documented, well controlled, or well understood. This was not the result of malice, more a lack of prioritization, high workloads focused on user needs, and a situation where the small gains weren't keeping up with the evolving threat. And we're not alone in this. Companies around the world have reported that a lack of visibility of what is in their environment is a can of worms they're too afraid to open. Much like the theme of this conference, we needed to rethink, reskill, and reboot. The university needed to rethink its priorities, our assumptions about what was on our network and how it was being used, the current and future environments, and the functions we actually needed to serve. We also needed to better understand what normal looked like so that we could detect suspicious behavior. We needed to reskill, to uplift capabilities not just of our support staff, but of all of our users, and our processes, and our tools and technology. While establishing clear priorities is critical, that was the easy part. We're in the uplift phase now, laying the groundwork for the future-proof next phase. For us, the reboot phase is a generational shift to zero-trust principles in our environment. This includes a new network, an overhaul of identity management, and the removal of passwords on our core systems. And while considering what normal looks like, we had some cleanup to do as well. My apologies if that triggers anyone. Those are bad. So our new capability model centers on the intersection, sorry, I've gone too far, on the intersection of assets, vulnerabilities, and threats. Pretty common language to most of the people here. But this is the core of our approach. To understand our attack surface, how we will be attacked, we need to know what we have as assets and how they're vulnerable. To understand the attacker's motivations, we need to know the value of those assets and who may want to harm us. And to understand how we will be attacked, we need to know the threats against us and our own vulnerabilities. Where they all meet is our business risk. Just like finance and HR, cyber is a risk to the business and should be treated as such. Moving to reskill. Immediately after the breach, we had to tackle the unknown unknowns, blind spots and question marks. And the known unknowns, answering the question, what is on our network and should it be? The university was carrying a lot of legacy infrastructure and a lot of bespoke research and technical equipment. This meant a lot of tech debt, leading to a lot of security debt. We simply didn't know where we were vulnerable and the state of our systems. Further, we had to untangle who owned what and was responsible for maintenance. The ANU is like its own city, with all the diversity and complexity that you might expect. At any given time, we have in the order of 74,000 devices on our network, including workstations and servers, running Windows, Linux, Apple, HPE, Cisco, APC, Android, Unix, among others. While some machines were centrally managed by the university's IT department, some colleges run their own. Some researchers would buy or build their own kit and plug it in. And there are around 20,000 students with an average of 3 devices each on the network. But the network is that one commonality between all of these environments. So the majority of our early focus was there. We introduced technical safeguards, including firewall zoning, MFA, encryption, data de-risking, and macro blocking. We partnered with industry to deploy a network visibility tool across the entire network We lit every dark corner and started ingesting real-time data. We linked our NPB to patch vulnerability and privileged access tools, and we had integrations and improving automation to provide scale and defense in depth. And when I say we lit all the dark corners in the network, this is what that looked like. Every dot represents a device, but it also represents a scientific or academic aspiration, something we need to protect, and in most cases, enable. In addition to the devices you'd expect, we have a lot of BYOD, IoT, medical IoT, operational tech, and scientific instrumentation, things that were purchased in 1970 and cannot be upgraded. Those clusters you see around the edges are private networks within the ANU, where someone clever decided to buy something clever and plug it in. I'll talk about culture in a moment, but academics as a general rule have a strong sense of personal ownership over technology and data, and we have to work with that. The chaotic cluster at the bottom right is the residential halls. ANU is also an ISP. We have to protect everything from a student connecting to the network on the cheapest gray market smartphone they can find to a plasma fusion reactor with an IP address, which is basically a sun. Moving on. Following the breach and the no-holds-barred executive support for our remit, we rapidly introduced or upgraded a lot of technology solutions in our environment. Some of this was just actioning upgrades that had been on the back burner. Others were whole-scale reforms. We introduced new tools, took ownership of tools that needed to be fixed, or worked hand in hand with the area responsible for a tool to uplift it. Our approach to technology and tools is modular. The backbone of our environment is the network, and the tools plug into this spine. We are not beholden to one stack or technology partner. We look for functionality, integration, automation, and importantly, alignment with the university's values. Some of these tools already form the core conceptual framing for Zero Trust. The same modularity can be said for the frameworks we follow. While we're guided by ISM, and we're building our compliance model against Essential 8 and Top 37, we also draw insights from NIST and other international standards. The university environment is unique, and as such, there's no one rule book to follow. With the right funding and authority and the right tools, we were able to achieve a significant security uplift in the first 12 months. We have continued to strengthen our protection and processes to keep pace with the expanding threat against us. In April this year, we blocked over 14 million malicious attacks and intrusion attempts. We blocked 307,000 phishing attempts. Due to the tuning of our mail filtering and education for our staff, the success rate of phishing campaigns, that is, getting to the point where a user clicks a link, is now down to 0.12%. We are also actively blocking around 20,000 malicious IP ranges and domains per day. As we modernized our tools and clarified our understanding of our environment, we needed to change the way we do business. We started using the data feeds from our new tools to profile the network. Specifically, we looked at device identification, the characteristics of those devices, communication channels, protocol analysis, building a complete asset inventory linked to criticality, and revisiting current policies and procedures to see if they align to best practice, or even current practice. Now that we knew what we had, we shifted to threats. We focused on ingesting intelligence and understanding tactics, techniques, and procedures, improving our capability to detect external and internal reconnaissance activity, our openness to lateral movement, the motivation of threat actors and what they might target, and an alert system for exfiltration attempts. While analyzing threats, we also undertook to better understand our weaknesses and vulnerabilities by linking network data to device profiles, undertaking continual health checks and monitoring, introducing and auditing technical controls like patching, improving, hardening, and auditing admin controls, improving perimeter controls, and putting everything through a risk management framework. And that's the last Simpsons GIF, probably. Everything that I've just outlined, every effort we undertake, has a particular and intentional focus. We view information security as a human-centric challenge, one which frames our behavior and decisions at the intersection of people, process, and technology within our environment. Behind every data breach, behind the technical detail, is a human-centric story full of emotion. The biggest threat to security is at the end of the keyboard, but they are also our greatest protection if they know how to be vigilant and what is and isn't right behavior. This leads us nicely into the final section of Reskill, our people. For us, this is the ANU community: students, professional staff, academic staff, researchers, partners, and alumni. Reskilling the environment, affecting real change, means changing the behavior of our users, teaching them how to operate in a more secure manner and how to be vigilant to threats. This means changing both our approach and their mindset. Changing the mindset is multifaceted and subtle. Hackers don't just hack systems, they hack people. The cyber threat actors hack your culture all the time. Why can't the defenders do it too? Successful cyber programs have in their DNA a strong change management component. So we needed to borrow from behavioral psychology and organizational change management, among others. In our case, we were fortunate enough to have the psychologists just across campus. They helped us design a human-centric program based on reinforcing personal accountability, using empathy and understanding, ensuring a positive security experience and obvious value, communicating the benefits before the risks, and defending our values and our purpose. This we needed to do at every level of the organization, and we're still hard at it. Our cultural change program is called CyberSense. It aims to use the skills and understanding that we give to these participants to apply scrutiny and common sense to the environment. We give them the confidence to scrutinize. This program, which kicked off in 2021, comprises online and bespoke training, videos, roadshows, resource libraries, and tools that researchers and staff can use to help make them be safer. With upwards of 2,500 users, that is 2,500 opportunities for error. But it's also 2,500 opportunities for cyber champions. Already, we're seeing a significant increase in disclosures from staff who think they have clicked a dodgy link, who noticed suspicious activity in their email account, or who just want us to check something that feels wrong. Even our own legitimate emails, usually mine, get reported and pinged for being overly opaque or for encouraging urgent action. So we're learning from that too. We need to change our language and we need to understand our audience. For CyberSense, as you can see, we've leaned hard into the quirky side of the university. We use humor to affect change, to make messages that cut through and are memorable. You might recognize some of the faces up on the slide right now. They're Chancellor Julie Bishop, former foreign minister, Vice Chancellor Brian Schmidt, Nobel Prize winner, and comedian Chris Ryan. The former let us animate them because of how much they believe in our body of work. The latter did because we paid her and it was funny. So we did a rethink of who, what, and why we are. We started a body of work to reskill our technology, our processes, and our people. The next phase of our journey is the reboot, retiring the old and starting anew on a platform that will be able to support and secure the university's growth, a zero-trust environment based on infrastructure as code. It's important to understand what zero trust is and is not. Zero trust is an architectural principle based on the removal of implicit automatic trust and the introduction of explicit constantly verified trust, or adaptive trust. This principle can form the basis of identity and authorization on more than just networks, and it should be linked to business intent. We're applying zero trust as a lens through which we build our modern infrastructure. But zero trust is not an off-the-shelf product, one technology tool that you can plug in or a firewall rule that you can set. The paradigm of zero trust as a foundational principle of infrastructure replaces what we currently have, insecure, disparate, and high-maintenance processes, with a modern system that is secured by design. The new network will bring together multiple activities, systems, and functions into one system with less tooling and inconsistency. Zero trust for ANU means infrastructure that is resilient, adaptive, and enabling. Zero trust takes a more granular approach than traditional castle and moat network security. Every application, every person, every device must prove its identity and authority before every session. And once authentication has occurred, they only get least privileged once they're in there. Zero trust is also software defined, so i.e. infrastructure as code. Software defined means utilizing program interfaces, source code, to manage, configure, and reconfigure the network. This means the network is highly customizable very quickly and distinct from traditional networks which rely on hardware reconfiguration to make changes. Sometimes this is also called programmable infrastructure. It also allows for the creation of repeated patterns and automation, which makes configuration and reconfiguration even easier still. Implementing Zero Trust involves building the right systems from the ground up, which means it needs funding, support, and engagement. So what? Why have you all come to listen to me speak today? Does the ANU's journey from breached to more secure create a roadmap for others to follow? I think it does. Our hard-learned lessons can act as a guide. Like the man said, our pain can be your gain. Keep in mind that your unique strengths and problems will form a unique solution. So a couple of bits of advice. First, have compassion for your starting point. It's the place to build from. It's the place to learn from. If you don't know what you have, you don't know what you can leverage and what you have to protect. Map your environment. Map with realistic capability. Map your behavior. Know your assets, your vulnerabilities, and your threats. And apply empathy when looking inward. It's not us versus them, it's just us. Understand the norms of your organization and their relationship with the technology. Understand the behavior that needs to change at every level. Build a plan around that behavioral change, a plan that's well-defined and is easy to support. A plan that removes friction and adds value. Set realistic but slightly ambitious goals. Work the problem in a logical order linked to risk. Build, borrow, and buy the skills and tools required. If you buy and borrow, make a plan to build so you have internal capability. Choose partners that align to your values and will be there alongside you when things go right and wrong, because they will. If you underpin infrastructure change with behavioral change, you'll achieve a more sustainable outcome. Build for your future needs, build a solution, not a fix. And finally, add value and earn the right to optimize. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please enjoy the gift as well, the Taka Gin, made by some Indigenous female distillers here in Australia. Wonderful stuff. I do know also the the Vice-Chancellor at ANU, Brian Schmidt, of course, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics a few years back for his team showing the universe was continuing to expand at an increasing rate, wasn't going to collapse on itself. While it's not his specialty area, he would have just totally geeked out on this sort of stuff, wouldn't he? He would have absolutely loved it. Give Liz another round of applause. Thank you. What a great presentation. Very honest, very open, not unlike Brett's one this morning. Our next speaker is a specialist in threat intelligence and threat hunting. He works in the Virus Total team in Google as a threat intelligence strategist. He's been an e-crime manager in S21sec for 5 years. He was deputy director for EU and Kaspersky's global research analysis team for almost 10 years. He's here to take us on an adventure from threat hunting to actionable threat intel. From Virus Total, this is Vicente Diaz.
So I was paying attention to the previous talk, and I realized I was very hungry, and I was like, why is that? It's because for me it's breakfast. I'm from Barcelona, Spain. So apologies if I look like a little bit confused at some point, but jet lag is, well. So I've been home for the last 2 years because of COVID, like everybody else. So this is my first business trip since then, and I chose like the opposite side of the world, basically, to travel. And I don't know if that was the best idea, but I'm really thankful for inviting me for this conference, and I'm really enjoying so far. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation today. My name is Vicente Diaz. Thank you very much once again for inviting me for this conference. And for the last 10 years, before joining Virus Total, I was in Kaspersky, and we were investigating APT attacks, basically. So from my experience there, I wanted today to share some of the ideas, lessons learned, and how I think that things have changed during all this time. Because these days we're all talking about threat intel, but it's not so clear how to use it. And now in Virus Total, I have the opportunity to see how many of our customers are dealing with all this threat intel. And sometimes, well, I would like to share a little bit what is my vision. Maybe you agree or not, but I think it's interesting to discuss. So the first question when I was preparing this presentation is, why we do threat hunting? What is the reason behind? And basically, the answer is to get some context. We want to know, hey, I have these indicators of compromise. I saw this happening in my company, in my computer, and I want to get more context. I want to know a little bit more. This is basically the main reason we are doing this threat hunting. But also, we want sometimes to detect something new. We do this paleontology. We discover these big campaigns in the past, and we are creating like a better understanding of how attackers are using different tools and techniques in order to infect us, right? And this changed a lot during the last years. Basically, I would say the main difference is that now we have much more data to share. And this is not necessarily something good, because by having that much data, it's computationally difficult sometimes to understand things. And also, we've been basically building as we were encountering things, as we were understanding how to deal with all of that. And at some point, this created a lot of noise that keeps stacking. It's making this snowball effect, and at the end, something small, like some bad intelligence from the very beginning, keeps growing. And today, we are making maybe some bad attribution based on some report that was published 8 years ago, where there was some misunderstanding about this group, this actor, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a danger, that we are having so much intel, so much data, and the data that we are having for threat intel, it was not designed to be shared in the best efficient way. For instance, if I share with you this IP, this is some random publication. I got it from OTX, Alien Bolt. And I was taking a look. This is from a publication from Auscert, and they are talking, I think it's about setnet. So this IP, if I share with you today, and I say, hey, this IP is malicious, you will be asking yourselves, okay, why? Well, in this case, it's a domain, sorry. But you will be asking yourselves, why is malicious? What is behind? And since when this is malicious? In reality, I was checking the report, and what they said is that this was compromised and was serving some malware. So my question here for you is, should we block it or not? Well, it depends, right? Depends what is your purpose with this. But what I'm saying is that basically what we do is we get any publication, we get all the IOCs, we put the tags, yes, setnet, malicious, and we throw it into some threat intel system. And from here, if we don't read the original report, then we don't know why, when, how, et cetera, et cetera. We will simply say, hey, this is setnet activity. Maybe it's not. So it's just a silly example, but it's reflecting what I want to say here, that this noise keeps growing. To make things a little bit more complicated, in the past we had like all these attacks, different groups creating their own malware. We have like different signatures. We have like a good understanding what kind of tool sets different actors were using. This is not the case anymore, where most of the attackers are using more or less the same stuff. If I say, I don't know, Cobalt Strike, Mimikatz, all this kind of stuff is what attackers are using over and over. In many cases, like we saw this morning, Lapsus Group, what are they using? Basically, they are stealing credentials. And from here, they are able to get whatever they want. So it's not about sometimes the complexity of the malware. And there is not such a thing like a signature for the groups. We started creating TTPs, which is, it sounds good on paper, but later it's very difficult to characterize a group by TTPs without any technical further details. Because eventually, all the groups are like fulfilling all the boxes in the enterprise attack matrix. But still, I think that if we are conscious of all these difficulties, there is a value in threat hunting. And in my opinion, I would say there are like 3 main things we can do when we do threat hunting, or 3 main benefits of doing threat hunting. The first one is having the knowledge to shape our security strategy. So sometimes we don't know how to start. Sometimes we are making decisions based on we don't know what. But this data exists today. And with this data, we can shape and we can prioritize how should be our security strategy. Let's say one simple example. Ideally, we want to have all the vulnerabilities patched in our environment. But we don't know where to start. We don't know which ones are more critical. Yes, there are like CVS score. So from here, we can say this is more critical than that. But which one is being used today, right now, by attackers the most? Do you have an answer for this? The thing is that you can get an answer for this. And from here, you can decide, like, I'm worried or not, I should prioritize this or another one. Mapping these campaigns for a more comprehensive vision of the attacks, this is like the second goal. And I think this is extremely important because many times our conception of our idea of the attacks when they come from OSINT is like publication, IOCs, end of the story. Maybe we have some yard rules, that's it. But it takes some effort to actually follow the campaign and to understand how it evolves. It's some effort, not much, but many people or many companies, in my experience, they don't do this extra step. And the value is here because the publication is at some point in time, but the campaign goes on. So you need to see how it evolves, and you need to readjust a little bit just to make sure that you are having a good understanding how it's evolving. And finally, for discovering new malicious activity. In this case, depends if you want, I don't know, to discover something to make a presentation here, for instance, or you want to, well, to check for anomalies that could be related to your main activity, to your main infrastructure, technologies, et cetera, et cetera. So I have some examples for all of these. The first thing is, as we discussed about this campaign tracking and monitoring, one of the things that I see many times is that YARA rules, for instance, are not updated. They are taken like they are. In some cases, many of these YARA rules these days are created automatically, which is a good thing. It's saving us a lot of time. But when these rules are created, many times they are overfitting the samples that are used for the research, meaning that they are detecting very well these samples, but maybe they don't escalate so well. So sometimes we need to keep working on them as they move on. Sometimes we also see that the YARA rules are created from different malware families, which results in the rules are not so good. And well, what I want to say is that just making this effort to make sure that we are on top of the campaigns and monitoring how they evolve is bringing us a much complete vision of how attackers are creating their campaigns and what kind of malware they're using. The second thing is discovering new activity. Actually, yesterday we were doing some workshop here, and in the meantime we were doing some exercises. I just started taking a look into this. So I would like to share with you, if you don't mind. Why I'm sharing this is just an example. Looks like the connection is not great, but happily I have it here open already. So this is just an example of the kind of things that we can do these days. And this is saving a lot of time, and this is giving us a very good idea of what's happening. So I found this document. This is a document that, for real, I found yesterday. I never seen before. And this document was related to some activity pretending to be related to the war in the Ukraine. Here is called US and allies provide chemical weapons to Ukraine's military. And actually, I found that from the same domain here, we found all these different documents. All of them were served, all of them were submitted to VirusTotal by one submitter, different submitters, but only one, which means it's pretty targeted. All of them came from different countries. If you see the countries, Hungary, Italy, Ireland, Great Britain, Czech Republic, Denmark, Lithuania, and Iceland. And all of them were related to the same topic, the Kremlin's allegation of chemical and biological weapons, Putin faced claims of whatever. So all of them also were first seen 2 days ago in VirusTotal for the first time. So I started taking a look, and from here I discovered, well, that this is related to some emotet. And again, this took like a few minutes just for me to understand at least the context. And these days we can do things like that. We can go into any of these documents and we can search for similarities, like similar files. And immediately we will get some results, as you can see here. So all these files are similar to this one. And if we take a look to these ones, NATO's general who were hiding in the underground bunker, whatever, name, list of NATO generals. So they are all slightly different, chemical weapons, but they are all part of the same cluster. So this kind of technologies is something that 10 years ago when we were doing this APT research, we didn't have. And today we do. And this is thanks first for having a big database that we've been growing all the community together. And second, by incorporating new techniques that allow us to do this in a very agile way. So thanks to these things, these days, we can use threat hunting for discovering new activity and get a context pretty immediately, which is great in case we find something suspicious. Finally, we were talking about monitoring trends for this knowledge-based security strategy. And here I wanted to share some of the discoveries we did during last year when we were monitoring changes in malware trends between 2020 and 2021, just based on VirusTotal data. So with these 2 years of malware, we got some interesting ideas. The first one was regarding the use of exploits. So we found not only that there was a 37% increase in the number of samples that were implementing some exploitation, they were using things like PowerShell, for instance, much more than before, exploiting at least 9 different vulnerabilities with PowerShell. But the average of the most popular exploits being deployed in the wild dropped crazily. In reality, from 93 days to 0 days, it doesn't mean that every single vulnerability was the same day that it was published already in VirusTotal. It doesn't mean that. But this is the average, meaning that some of them were significantly before, at least for the most popular ones. And we also found 57 0-days vulnerabilities that were deployed in the wild. So it means that attackers, they have resources, in this case for 0 days, and well, I wouldn't say this is something that revolutionary to find anymore. They simply have access to them. The second thing is how they were moving to new formats. This is also interesting, like moving from docx files infected to Excel files infected. In reality, it's the same. There are simply macros behind. But our perception is that maybe this has to do with social engineering, like you know that documents are malicious, but maybe you are not sure about Excel files, and you are opening them. We saw some big campaigns, for instance, deploying Dridex using this. There was a huge increase in the number of ELF files that we saw in VirusTotal. And the reason for this was also Log4j, obviously, which was implementing this for some Mirai, Tsunami, and some coin miners, this vulnerability in order to spread the malware as fast as possible. So this was one of these events that somehow it has the potential to change everything, this kind of vulnerabilities. We also saw how they are switching their tool set from some rats, from some different backdoors to new ones, or even to old ones that they were reshaped. For instance, things like Dridex, we saw an increase of almost 1,000%, well, not almost, 1,300%. AsyncRat also an increase of 130%, while other rats basically disappear from VirusTotal, like this Gravity Rat or Dorkbot. Here you can see, for instance, in this chart the number of lookups for Cobalt Strike. And well, what is funny is that if you see the other part of the chart, which I should have included here, you see first the submissions, and then you see the lookups. So basically, first they are submitted to VirusTotal, they are being exploited later, and people is searching for them, like, what is that? But basically, you can keep an eye first in what kind of malware attackers are using, and make sure that you are good, protected against that. And second, in many cases, we don't pay attention to all these generic backdoors and rats, just because they are all, and we are like, well, who cares about this rat, if it is detected or not? But this is the first step in the kill chain of the attackers to deploy whatever it is. In this case, Dridex. I was super surprised, but still. We also saw C-Loader being used by attackers to deploy a lot of ransomware. So it's interesting, because still this malware has an important role by attackers. So just to finish my presentation, just to double down on these ideas, I think that this constant evolution for threat hunting is something that, if we are conscious of the limitations, is a good thing, because we can use it in a much more efficient way, but we need to define the goals that we want to accomplish. I think that just simply accumulating IOCs and accumulating data without any purpose, at the end of the day, is a problem. We need to put a little bit of effort just to do this monitoring, as I said, and to make sure that all the data that we are ingesting is valid, is solid, because this, at the end of the day, if we don't do that, this snowball effect is created, and then we can make big errors when assessing our intelligence. But still, I think that the potential is tremendous. I think that this is something that we are all exploring together. We are all growing. This is a new set of techniques that is changing with time, as well as the tools that we are using. So still, I think it's a vital element for any security strategy. And thanks to the new technologies, we can start using this. But again, the most important thing is to define the goals, how we want to use it, so we can make something out of this. So that will be everything. Thank you very much. And I will be around if you have any questions. Just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicente. Am I the only person who's going to miss Dorkbot? Probably that's the way it goes. Thank you very much, Vicente. You can watch Vicente tonight at the gala dinner wrestling with his jet lag as he alternates between complete fatigue and 1,000% energy. Give him another round of applause. That was a wonderful chat, mate. Really interesting stuff. Vicente, of course, from VirusTotal, one of our wonderful sponsors. On the topic of sponsors, can I thank again the platinum sponsors, Okta, we heard from Brett this morning, EMT, Gigamon, and Netscope. Did someone say Netscope? That brings us to our final speaker for day one of AusCERT2022, an experienced CSO, CISO, strategic advisory, investor, and coach. He's currently the APAC CSO for Netscope, helping customers manage their digital and cyber risk programs, in addition to working across industry with the aim of making the digital economy a safer place to do business. To talk about the integrated security model, security beyond just cyber, big round of applause, please, for David Fairman.
Hello, welcome everyone. I realise that I think I'm the last session, and you hear this every conference, the last session, everybody's waiting for their drink, so I'll try and keep this quick. But hopefully you'll learn a little bit of something from my presentation. So, look, I'm just talking about my experience. For those of you who don't know me, I've had a long career in banking finance at the CSO level. I've built 2 fusion centres, one for NAB when I repatriated back to Australia in 2018, and I built one for RBC as well. And we're going to talk about the fusion centre and the integrated security model. And I guess maybe I think about it a little bit differently to how other people sort of view fusion centres, and I'll explore that. I'll explore, a couple of the techniques you can use to think about venturing into this space, but more to the point, the outcomes we can achieve. So, what we'll discuss. I sort of covered that already. So, complex environment. We know that you know, I don't have to explain the threat landscape and the rise in sophistication and velocity and sophistication of attacks here. But I think what's really interesting is what we've seen as an evolution over, I would say, I'm actually going to say sort of 12 years, is the expanding role of the CISO or the security officer. And I'll give you a little bit of a history, my experience. So I think if we go back and we talk about fusion centres, where did the term fusion centre come from? After 9/11, it was really about how the intelligence agencies came together to really share intelligence in a lot better way, because we found out that they weren't communicating, they weren't sharing, they didn't have the situational awareness, and there were silos. And that actually led to exposures or lack of understanding of what was happening in the threat environment. So that sort of started to drive through government. And you found that industry started to take on that process as well, or take on that concept. And it became very, I think the leaders in this space, personally, it was the European banks. And I'll give you an example. I started at Royal Bank of Scotland in 2005. I worked in a division called Security and Fraud. So we had an integrating, what I call the enterprise or the integrated security model back in 2005. I was part of the information security function. We reported into a director of security and fraud. And that director of security and fraud covered multiple functions: information security, business continuity, crisis management, intelligence, physical security, fraud, investigations, financial crime. It was, and if you look at RBS, if you look at Barclays, if you look at Lloyd's, they were operating in that space, and they were really starting to break down the silos between all these, front to back security functions of the bank. And we started to realise that there was a lot better situational awareness and insights that we could, collaborate on and actually make faster decisions around what was happening in terms of financial crime, fraud, and even cyber threat back in the day. And I think if you think about that evolution, that's back in 2005, 2007, through to 2010. The US banks, I think, started to pick that up. Obviously, when I came to NAB in 2018, NAB was the first bank in Australia, and a couple of the other Australian organisations, I want to call out IAG and NBN, they had brought fraud and cyber security together. That's great. That's sort of one part of it. You look at IAG today, they've really started to move through that process where they're bringing fraud, investigations, cyber, physical together. But NAB was the first bank to do that here. CBA have just done that underneath Brendan Good, who's the new Chief Security Officer there at CBA. But I think, those CISO or CSO roles are now expected. We're expected now these days to have a much broader understanding of what's happening in the business, understanding what impacts are happening to our customers, and making much smarter, faster defence decisions. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So the journey to Fusion, I've sort of spoken about that evolution from an operating model perspective, which is really breaking down the silos of those functions, figuring out that end-to-end operating. When I talk about that end-to-end operating model, what are the handoffs between these different functions? And it's not just, I'm not just talking about cyber fusion here. I think we all talk about cyber fusion. We talk about, breaking down the silos between our pen testing teams and our SOC teams and our GRC teams. That's sort of just running a cyber function, in my opinion. You need to make sure your core team is communicating and you've got clear handoffs. But let's make this bigger. This must be much bigger than just a cyber conversation. It needs to be an operational resilience conversation. And that's where you start to bring in these other functions, the fraud functions, the investigations functions, physical security, business continuity, etc. And there's different sort of processes you can take, and journeys in terms of for different organisations. But what we start to see there is really, we start to see a data-driven approach to how we start to solve and digitally transform our own security function. And that's where I think Fusion has been really successful for security functions. We talk about digital transformation in our own business, right? We know that our organisations are steaming down this digital transformation or this digitisation or this digital strategy. They're doing that for a couple of reasons. One, they want to take cost out of the environment, and they want to create, productivity benefit. But two, they want to reap value from that data. They want to get greater insights from that data. They want to be able to understand their customer better. They want to be able to understand what products and markets they want to enter into. They want to make smarter business decisions. The organisation, the business itself, is becoming this data-driven organisation. The Fusion Centre, in my view, is the security team's own digital transformation or digital strategy, because we want to get greater insights from that data. We want to change and transform the way that we've operated in the past. We want to take cost out. We want to simplify, but we want to reap value from that data. From my perspective, how do you start thinking about a Fusion Centre? How do you define it? How do you put some shape around it? It's a great term, but I think there's a couple of things that I like to use to frame what Fusion actually means. Creating a brain, which is the brain or the core of how we're going to start to make decisions. But we want to understand what we want to start making decisions about. So what are those shared goals and those shared outcomes across all those various functions? Right. Clearly, in a digital world, there's a massive and a clear crossover between our cybersecurity teams and our fraud teams. And when we talk about online banking and we talk about mobile banking, digital payments, we can think about insider threat. There's clear crossover there from an insider threat or cyber perspective, physical security function perspective. I think we want to understand that there's a big data play to be had here, which is the correlation of that data. So bringing together not just the data sets, but actually the unification of activities. So coming back to that cross-function, front-to-back operating model conversation I was just having. Making sure that all those inputs, coming back to that 9/11 sample or example, making sure that all these inputs come into one control centre where you can add traffic control and create better situational awareness. And integrated action, so much better detection and response capabilities. The idea of Fusion is to be able to move from this reactive state to a more proactive and predictive state. And I actually do see a Fusion Centre, in my experience, being separate to a SOC. You have your SOC, which is sitting there looking at all the alerts and monitoring, doing the threat hunting, identifying actual incidents or intrusions in your environment and responding to that, solving for that. The Fusion Centre is trying to be predictive. It's trying to help you anticipate an attack before that attack happens, or anticipate a fraud before a fraud happens. And we'll talk about some success cases that I've seen before. So the converged security model. You heard me talk about the various functions that you might want to bring together. There's a lot of value in those disparate data sets. And actually bringing them together and analysing that, enriching that data with each other and external threat data, external criminal-related data. You can really start to drive proactive models and approaches to how you increase that situational awareness and really, we talk about mean time to detect, mean time to contain. That same process, that same metric applies across all of those functions. It's not just a cyber measure. Think about the co-location elements, and I think this is really tough in today's world, actually. And I haven't run a Fusion Centre in a remote working environment, but in my experience, it was about co-location, getting these teams to sit together, mixing those teams together, so that the digital forensics and incident response teams would hear what the fraud teams were talking about, or the threat teams would hear what the physical security teams were talking about. And when I talk about threat, I don't mean just cyber threat. I mean all threat. So physical threats, geopolitical threat, social economic risks, and bringing all that in together, because those conversations that they have in one Fusion Centre, where they're sitting side by side, it spawns thinking. It helps you join the dots. I actually really think that today, in that remote working world, we lose a little bit of that. Cross-pollination of skill sets, I think that's really important. That's a great outcome. That's a great benefit. We know that we're fighting for talent today. We know that there's this skill shortage. So how do we start to, understand some of those duplications that we might have across those functions. As an example, we have investigations team and we have incident response or digital forensics teams. They have some very transferable skills that we can tap into, and we can help create some efficiencies in our operating model. But also, we can start to engage our teams better, because now actually a cyber person becomes a fraud person, a physical security person becomes a threat person, and our teams are being stretched, they're learning more, and they're starting to be engaged a little bit more. I think that's a really great outcome, because that's one way of maintaining and managing and engaging your team and retaining your team. I spoke about the reducing duplication and inefficiencies. That's great, because we'll identify that there's common elements across those functions, and we can streamline that, we can take cost out. And I think a real important thing, and this is really key, I can't underestimate how important this is the battle rhythm and the coordination. So making sure that you have a morning stand-up in that fusion centre. What are we seeing across the environment? And it could be not just, think broadly. What's happening from a bad weather perspective? Do we expect bad weather to increase, in a certain area? We're going to have to start thinking about closing branches. If we start thinking about closing branches, what does that mean from a physical security perspective? Is there activity we need to take there, right? So really increasing that situational awareness, having those battle rhythms, having a morning stand-up, having an afternoon stand-up, making sure the teams are communicating effectively. Then understanding how we synthesize some of that information and enrich the various functions. So what's right for your organisation? I've spoken about my experience in banking in 2 organisations where we pulled those elements together, but no one size fits all. I spoke about NBN, who pulled, I think actually they've got fraud together now. IAG recently just pulled in their fraud function, but they just had their start in this process was physical and cyber. But I think you need to figure out what's right for your organisations. To do that, you want to think about what are your capabilities, how mature are those capabilities, and the key thing, which you've heard me talk about, is that underlying data set. Bringing those data sets together, understanding what data you do have, because there's no point really starting on a journey where the underlying data sets aren't really going to help you. Then it just becomes a process element, and it's more than just, for me, the completeness of the fusion centre is both the process and the data-driven capability. Understand what your biggest pain points are. That's a great way to start. That'll help you think about where do you need to start first. What are those areas that make sense to bring together first? What data does your organisation have? Spoke about that. More to the point, what further data do you need? Do you know what your gaps are? What would make you... So as you're thinking about this journey and this roadmap, what are the data sets that are going to give you biggest impact? When I talk about biggest impact, really it's about risk reduction. So risk buy down. Data platform. Can't underscore this enough. I spoke about digital transformation and why our organisations are going down this path. Fusion for me is a digital transformation for security environments or security teams, security functions. It's about us getting greater insights from the data that we use or the data that we have, making much better security decisions, faster security decisions, ideally becoming proactive, anticipating things before they happen, becoming predictive, and I'll talk about some of those things in a minute. So how do you do that? Data science plays a big part. That comes back to the operating model as well. So my 2 experiences, I owned the data science team. I built a data science team at RBC, and they were joined at the hip with my threat and threat management team. I owned that, which was fantastic because I could really prioritise that. At NAB, I didn't own the data science team, but ultimately, you want to use data science, big data analytics. We know about this, we've spoken about this. We talk about how data is driving our decisions and driving the way that we operate today. This is no different. Use techniques like clustering analysis, neural networking. It'll provide better insights and predictive analytics. And I'll give you some of those success stories in a minute. So use cases and success stories. A couple of things I've seen is preventative fraud indicators. Think about it. In a digital world, digital banking, online banking, mobile banking, when you bring all these data sets together and these functions together, we can see the entire data stream or the entire click stream from the endpoint, the laptop or the PC or the mobile device, all the way through to the actual transactions of the customer. These things, you have that whole entire lineage. You can see all, and when you're continually monitoring that entire click stream, you'll start to identify outliers, variances, threats, which will allow you to be a lot more predictive in that downstream impact, which could result in a fraud. Being able to predict that fraud and reduce the impact on the customer is what we want to do, right? That's the goal. And actually, what you find is, and we had this success at RBC where we actually, we lodged 4 patents when I was there for predictive fraud indicators, which was a fantastic outcome for us, and significantly reduced our fraud losses as a result of the analytics and the insights that we were getting through this process or this capability. Threat modeling, enrich your own threat modeling process. Because you're going to have all this data available and you're going to see patterns, you're going to see new use cases, you're going to identify unknowns, things that we haven't seen before. Your threat modeling from a security and risk perspective and process perspective gets much better. So you feed that back into your project process and your BAU risk management process. So now you're having this complete cycle of these unknowns that you probably wouldn't have seen before, and this now you have this path, this gradual maturity of uplift as that modelling and those insights grow. So it really does start to ramp your overall security posture. Inside a threat, I think actually for me that's a quick win, right? So bringing together the physical security logs, the logical logs, and you'll start to see anomalies really quickly. I'm sure a lot of us sort of do some of that stuff today if you bring your physical logs in together. Opportunities and challenges. So why should you do it? So improved visibility, efficiencies, move from a detective and reactive state to a more proactive state. And actually what you probably find is, like I mentioned, you're going to still have your SOCs who are there for detect and respond, absolutely, but you're going to have this analytics, data-driven capability that's going to allow you to be more predictive, be more controlled. Optimizing value of existing systems, right? Between those various functions that we spoke about, this duplication in types of systems, a really good example is case management, right? Having one case management system across those functions enables a lot better handoff and visibility of information in an investigation or an incident. It also reduces cost of your operating environment because now actually you're not running 2 different systems, 2 different disparate systems. You can say, there's a cost out benefit there to be had. Improved organisational resilience. Ultimately, that's what we're here for. Right? Cybersecurity is great, but cybersecurity is, I think, us as a profession have realised now that we're never going to protect everything, that there is always going to be an impact. The mindset now is around resilience. And I think it's an operational resilience, just not a cyber resilience element for me when I talk about bringing together that integrated enterprise integrated model. Expect challenges along the way, and I can't underscore this enough. This is a massive change to how organisations work, and like any change in any organisation, it requires strong leadership, it requires taking people on that journey and managing that organisational change. The technology is sort of the easy part. I think technology is getting easier, change is getting harder, and actually how do you get your organisation to change the way that they operate? It takes strong leadership, and it takes strong leadership not just from a security leader, but also from across the organisation. Because we're going to have to, people are going to lose some ground, people are going to lose their fiefdoms that they've built. But that's when it comes back to really having those shared goals and making sure that we're all bought in and we understand what we're trying to achieve. It requires, so some of the challenges is new ways on how you're going to start to connect these dots. So maybe introducing new technologies, new capabilities, like that data science learning function. Where to start? So I think, having done this a couple of times, I think there's a couple of quick wins you can do that you can build on to take this forward. One is identify those goals that will be most relevant to your business. Not necessarily the security function. Get out and talk to your business leaders. What are their biggest challenges? What are they biggest concerned about? How do you demonstrate value to your business leaders? Identify 3 or 4 of those top goals that these various functions need to work together to achieve. And that's going to start a process in that, that human change process that I spoke about, or that organisational change process. It's going to start people thinking about and then get them bought into that. They'll start to see success and they'll start to see benefit. Start somewhere. So in RBC, as an example, my peer who was the head of fraud, we came up with Fusion Friday. So every Friday we'd get part of the cyber team and part of the fraud team and our data science team to sit together. And we built that sort of organically over time. It was getting those teams, because those teams sat in different buildings, they didn't really talk too much, didn't overly communicate. Actually, what they found when they were sitting together and they were talking, they was in one place with these shared goals that they're trying to achieve, it really built a esprit de corps in the team, and it really started to demonstrate benefit and learnings. Prioritise 2 or 3 key processes. It could be an insider threat piece. It could be a account takeover on online banking as a use case. Think about the handoffs between those use cases. So what's the handoff between the digital forensics and incident response team to the fraud team and the investigations team? How do you streamline some of that? Demonstrate value. Co-locate teams, physically or virtually. Like I say, I think it's a little bit difficult these days with the virtual environments, but I'm sure there's good collaboration tools that we can use to solve for that. Actively manage the change of people. Like I say, the big key thing here is not so much the technology change, we can get through that, it's actually changing people. I'll talk from experience. Some of the investigators and physical security team and even the cyber teams, they all have their own opinions and their challenges, and they think that they know better than the other team. You need to break that stuff down, right? And that takes strong leadership. Celebrate success regularly, right? Tell war stories. Motivate the team. Make sure the team understands the value of what we've done and where we're being successful. So that's it for me. Hopefully that was semi-interesting. The key point for me is around, I really see this as our own digital transformation, and how do we get more value out of data, just as our organisations are trying to do that to grow and create better, create revenue and grow their business. We should be doing the same. We should be thinking about our own digital transformation. I think this is a great way to enable that. Thank you. Thank you.
And he finished with 21 seconds still on the clock. That's the sort of accuracy I like from Netscope. As they say, mate, thank God it is Fusion Friday. Now, we are done for the day. In order for the Star team to prepare for tonight's gala dinner, we ask you to leave as quickly as possible once we're done in about 30 seconds. Carry on any conversations outside. If you want to hear a fascinating conversation, in the exhibition hall by the Combi Keg, Alex Tilley and Shanna Daly are going to have a fireside chat talking through solutions, issues that have been touched on today more broadly across your industry. See you back here at 6:30. 6:30 is when the drinks start out in the gardens for the gala dinner. You can only enter through the glass door of the event centre. You can't come through the garden kitchen. And it's only at AusCERT that I get to say this. I can't imagine any other gala dinner housekeeping where I'd say, don't forget to bring your Lego kit for the Speed Build Challenge that will take place during the gala dinner this evening. How about one final round of applause for all our speakers today. Thank you for being so attentive and staying to the end of the day. See most of you at the dinner in just over an hour.